Welcome to Food Freedom Radio. I'm Laura Hedlund, a nature-led gardener and a person who went to a great event this week, the Food Eggs Idea Week, sponsored by Naturally Minnesota, and that is the topic of today's show. But first, I want to share a fish story. So 18 years ago, we got one pleco, Plecostomus fish, and it's about an inch long. Really, these are not good fishes for aquarium tanks because they grow to be up to 2 feet big. We have a very, very big tank in our house, and we use the fish water to fertilize the plants, and our Plecostomus is close to 1 foot long. So this week, I heard some weird noises, and I discovered this fish on the floor, flopping on the floor. And for a few seconds, I was in total emotional turmoil. I was screaming. I was really yelling for someone else to come and help. I felt panicked, uncertainty. I went to pick up the fish, and then I kind of freaked out. I panicked because it's flapping. And personally, I was raised with 4 older brothers. I don't pick up flapping fishes. What's going to happen? The fish could wiggle in my hand. But is it already doomed? Is it too late? Time is of the essence. So many racing thoughts, so much chaos, and so much emotional turmoil. And then I calmly said to the fish, I love you. I did. I love you, fish. I felt the calmness in me. I quickly picked up the fish, got it back into the water. The fish is happily swimming and is doing just fine. And really picking up the fish wasn't that hard. Yet the imagined part was so chaotic. So that simple act of saying I love you to fish created the space for calm and effective work. What is it that I love? I love health and the feeling of well-being. I love clean water, just relationships, vibrant soil, belonging to place. I love getting my hands in the soil. I love the sounds of birds, the sight of butterflies, trees. I love honoring the ancestors and protecting the descendants. How do we have a food system built on knowing this type of love? Why it may be common to imagine that creating such a food system grounded on love is impossible in these extractive times, but is it? So the second lesson of this fish story is that I was looking for someone else to put the fish back in the tank. I was afraid of not being capable. I was afraid the ship was jumping, and I had some irrational fears about the fish possibly hurting me. But love is ultimately more powerful than fear. We are the ones we've been waiting for, and when it comes to the current fish system, when it comes to the current food system, the fish is on the floor. We're losing topsoil, nitrates in the water. Our food is losing nutritional value. Climate change is already having horrific impacts. Farmers are struggling both financially and emotionally. This Food Ag Week was more than a hopeful event. Following my fish story is about individuals and community working together to get the fish back into the tank. Welcome to Food Freedom Radio. Ellison Hahn, Executive Director of Naturally Minnesota.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay, so share us a little bit of your background.
Sure. I'm actually a food scientist by training. I spent over a decade doing product development at Land O'Lakes and at Target. And during my time there, I very much, they started to sprout up accelerators and things like that and really enjoyed mentoring startups through that. And the through line that came out was my side hustle through most of that was actually I coached club level soccer for 10 years. For girls age 8 to 16, and it was an incredible opportunity for mentorship. I played soccer forever, and once I stopped playing, I started consulting for a company based in New York, actually. That was all about helping startups scale their formula, find them a co-man, do scale-up trial runs at their co-man. And when the role for this organization, which we were previously called Grow North, we changed to Naturally Minnesota 2 years ago, a rebrand. And I was like, I get to help the entire food system, of entrepreneurs, not just ones who can afford to pay consultants, which is very few people, turns out. So it's been an incredible journey. I've been in role about 4.5 years now. Like I mentioned, the organization has evolved in those times, and it's been really fun to dive in on this side. And we are very lucky in Minnesota to have such an outsized agricultural practice here. And it's been really important to keep that through line, even though a lot of the work we do at the organization is with CPG brands or consumer packaged good brands, which could be pretty much anything you buy on shelf at Target. But we especially focus on food, egg, bev, and natural products.
So tell us again about what is Naturally Minnesota?
So we are a nonprofit. We actually live at the University of Minnesota, at the Carlson School of Business, at the Holmes Center of Entrepreneurship. We are one of a handful of programs at the Holmes Center. The Minnesota Cup is a sister organization of ours. It's a very well-known, it's the largest startup competition in the country. And they have 9 divisions, and Food Ag Bev was one of them. And they realized they got such an outsized response and applications for that division. And there really wasn't an organization built to serve those entrepreneurs. They only take 10 semifinalists. So what do you do with the hundreds others that need help? And that's how they decided to stand up Grow North. So Grow North was built as an industry-specific organization to provide connection, on-ramps, education, networking, everything that an early-stage company would need to scale their business efficiently in Minnesota.
So why do we want entrepreneurs in the food system?
Oh, man. Great question. I mean, why do you want entrepreneurs in anything?
Maybe because I want people involved?
Yeah. You know,
'cause people know how to pick up the fish and get them back in the tank.
They do, and entrepreneurs know how to do that creatively. You know, it's fascinating. Minnesota, because we are a top 5, 6 ag producing state. We are home to almost 10 Fortune 500 headquartered companies in the food and ag space here. So, and we have the highest concentration of food scientists in the country, believe it or not. And so we have an outsized expertise arena in Minnesota. However, because there is such a great corporate structure, you often don't get as many people who want to dive into entrepreneurship. You can have a very stable, comfortable life in corporate America. And so people who are a little more, Minnesotans are not always risk takers at times, but the beauty of entrepreneurship is its economic development. It's where innovation comes from. It's a wonderful opportunity for people who maybe have been in corporate America and say, you know what, I think I could do this better or different or in a more interesting way, and to take that step and jump in. So supporting them to scale their businesses is part of building the economy locally.
It's part of building the economy, and it's also very difficult for individuals, and you need that ecosystem support.
100%. It takes a village.
It takes a village. Okay, so we're going to talk about the event. It started with a video from Senator Amy Klobuchar.
It did. We had hoped to get her in person, but, it is a busy time of the season. Who knows? With election season upon us. But she was very gracious, sent us in a video to talk a little bit about her work on the Farm Bill, which they're diligently trying to complete. And there's a lot of the Farm Bill actually contains its work around SNAP and WIC and those type of programs. There are other government programs I know that do address different parts of the ag system, but things that are really important, I know from a lot of the farmers we've talked to, has been around crop insurance and the lack thereof for specialty crops or cover crops, which is one of the big barriers for farmers to kind of dive into the regenerative practice landscape.
And I knew that Minnesota was a leader in turkey production. Next week, we're going to have John Peterson, the owner of Ferndale Turkey, on.
Amazing.
So that's cool. But Minnesota's the top producer of turkey.
We are.
So, and that regenerates in a lot of ways. So this is a very important to Minnesota's economy. Our ag system is fundamental to our quality of life in Minnesota.
It is, and not just crops, but to your point, animal agriculture. Turkeys, pigs, cattle or dairy industry. Obviously, I worked at Land O'Lakes for 8 years, one of the largest dairy co-ops, so I'm very familiar in that realm as well. But yeah, again, we outkick our coverage in terms of our impact as a state when you look at us and across the entire country.
So the opening keynote was really fun, was Lundberg Family Farms.
Yes, Lundberg has been a pioneer in the regenerative organic space. And they have been around for generations. I believe it was 1937, peak Dust Bowl, when they the family moved west to California and decided to grow rice. And they have really navigated their way to figuring out how to grow, I think, 17 or 19 different varieties of rice that they sell, and then do it in a way using regenerative practices. And the hard part about regenerative agriculture is there's no definition anywhere. There's no there's USDA organic certified. There's no USDA regenerative certified yet. And so a lot of it is up to interpretation. There are a number of agencies that are doing certifications. They were all there this week. Regenified, ROA, the Regen Ag Alliance. So there are people who are doing that, but everybody's got a little bit different definition.
And we're going to be talking more about this, but with Lundberg's, they are certified as regenerative organic. So they're doing both the organic and the regenerative. And yeah, the family story is that the guy saw the Dust Bowl and he saw the soil health and he saw that. And when he moved and started doing the farming he was doing, everyone thought they were crazy. But they have managed to thrive economically.
They have.
And because they're available at the co-ops. And it was actually even one of the things I liked hearing about it was the relationship between Lundbergs and those crazy hippies who helped start things like Seward Co-op. That was that ecosystem that kind of supported each other. And that was what led to this company that is a common brand now. And one of the things I loved is they're one of their ways that they do their things is they really try to protect the ducks. Mm-hmm. So their marketing included all this stuff about ducking days.
Yep.
It was a very playful approach. So after the keynote, there was this conversation with partnering organizations.
Yes. So part of historically, Food Ag Ideas Week has been what we would call it our kind of own version of a regional future food tech, or some of those other conferences where it's come hear some of the latest and greatest and interesting innovation or things like that. And we pivoted this year to do FAI differently, and that's where the structure for the day came from to come up a little bit differently. So we wanted the speakers, the content, the information to be very actionable. Intentional. We wanted people to say, I have a better understanding of what it takes if I want to partner with anybody up and down this regen chain and what it would need to be. And so we had a handful of orgs that had helped put together, the day of content, like what should we be talking about? Who should be the players at the table? And two of those were Mad Markets, formerly Mad Agriculture, and Merge Impact. So if you are anywhere up and down the value chain and you don't know Alex Heilman and Mad Markets, you should call him immediately. He is really pioneering on how they're navigating that. And then if you're a farmer and you're wanting to figure out how do I measure the impact of what my practices are doing on farm and how do I get into markets, Merge Impact is there to help farmers do that as well. And then there are a couple others.
So we're going to take a break shortly, but yeah, Mad Markets also took over Timeless Food, and I've done shows on the Lentil Renegades. The guys come down, he had another crazy idea. How about growing lentils? And it's like, oh no, they're the largest lentil provider, and lentils are so good for the soil. But another quote from that is, conventional farming is killing the planet, including us. So how do we build a food system that's enlivening? So we're talking with Allison Hahn, the Executive Director of Naturally Minnesota, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Food Freedom Radio. I'm Laura Hedlund.
Sitting in the sun, counting my money, fanned by a summer breeze, sweeter than the honey is counting my money, those greenbacks on the tree.
Those greenbacks on the trees. I love this song from Louis Armstrong. So we're talking about an event. With us is Allison Hahn, the Executive Director of Natural Minnesota. And so there was an event this week on Food and Ag Week. And the next day when I woke up, it's about a purpose-based economy, right?
Yeah. Conscious businesses, conscious practices. How does that support the people, the planet, and everything within?
And people actually doing the work of creating that. And then I also, that same day, I had this idea of like rabid economics, which, like an animal or a diseased economics. And so maybe some are dreaming about conquering Mars and yet have yet to not to conquer, but to connect with home. And so this whole idea of purpose-based economy. And so we're just kind of reviewing what happened on the thing. And now there's this segment of farmer perspectives. So let's talk about some of these farmers that we're talking on that segment.
Yeah, we had a fun array. So Matt Meyer, Thousand Hills Lifetime Grazed, regenerative cattle farmer. Noreen Thomas of Doubting Thomas Farms. She's an incredible farmer doing a lot of heritage grains and things in Moorhead. And she actually supplies a fair amount of James Beard award-winning chefs who come to her. So she's an incredible advocate in the industry. Sandy Seiberg, our friends to the east in Wisconsin, he is Rye Revival. And then rounding it out was Luke Peterson of A-Frame Farms, who's in Dawson, Minnesota, kind of on the border of Minnesota and North Dakota, who a farm tour at his farm was actually the impetus for the entire event this year.
Wow.
Yeah. We did a farm tour on his farm last year in August, and it was the first time on farm where they had every player in the value chain be a part of the day. So obviously he is the farmer. They had the processors like the Bakersfield. They had the certifying agencies, ROA was there, Alex with Mad Markets was there on who's helping build the supply chain piece. And then they had the brands that actually buy from him. So Patagonia Provisions, Simple Mills, Lil Bucks, and we did tours and then had a couple different panels of all of them talking about, what it takes to bring a product from on-farm through the value chain to life. And it was so people just did not realize, A, how much effort it takes, the risk Luke as a farmer has to take to do this because there's no crop insurance for many of them. He had a 10-year plan for his crop rotation of what field will have what and to make sure that he was caretaking of the soil. But also he had the right crop mix so he could still be profitable. And that's been a conversation that actually played out yesterday afternoon. AURI, a partner of ours, they did a Kernza event. And they had farmers talking about the ones who are successful are the ones who don't just do straight Kernza or straight other crops that are regenerative. They have to have the mix of, soy, corn, wheat, because those are the cash crops. Those are the ones that are covered by crop insurance. And if there's an act of God or, weather event, something that happens, those will be covered. And then they can make sure they can still pay their bills at the end of the season. Whereas if something bad happens and you have no access to crop insurance, you're SOL. Those farmers have no recourse, and farmers are already, strapped for cash in terms of trying to be profitable. So, the conversation from farmers is so important because they're the ones assuming the most risk when people are looking to try and get these crops and these things grown. And working with farmers in terms of long-term multi-year contracts. So they have a guaranteed offtake for their crop. Making sure that there are other, maybe financial tools that can cover gaps that crop insurance is not doing from a federal standpoint. I know there's a lot of advocating going on the Hill around how do they start to get some of these perennial crops or cover crops added to make sure that they can do that. But the problem is that really the current system is not set up to support people doing what's best for the land. It's set up to support the maximum economic advantage. And so it may say, I only need a certain number of bushels per acre. I don't need as much as they do, or I don't want to use these inputs on here. And so there's not enough flexibility currently in our farming system for them to do the right thing.
Right. Okay. So we know, and there's a quote that I wrote down, conventional farming is killing the planet, including us. So the externalities of the conventional farming, the row cropping, the chemicals, the entire extractive system, which the farmers, again, they're having emotional and financial problems. But that extractive system, there are a lot of externalities. And so the people that are working to change it are taking a load of extra risk. And so, but they're doing it.
They are. It's a really hard cycle to break out of. And I don't think any farmer approaches their land of that kind of ne'er-do-well, carefree, whatever happens, happens. These are families, generational families who have been on that land stewarding it, and they want to do what's best for it. But when you have massive equipment you need to pay for, when you have to get the inputs to make sure you get your yields, to get the crop insurance, to get the price point you need, when you are stuck in commodity markets where you just don't have a lot of freedom in terms of what's going to happen. Everything happens to them, not for them. Mm-hmm. And so figuring out a new system that can work with farmers, meet them where they're at. An interesting quote from the Kernza event last night was around a lot of farmers are starting to use Kernza because it's a perennial wheat variety, for those who don't know. It's often used a lot in the beer industry. Patagonia launched a beer. Locally, Bang Brewing has launched some. There's a bunch. They use it at a 10 to 20% kind of level in the recipe. But it's because Kernza is a perennial wheat. So you plant it in the fall or spring. It has to go through at least one winter cycle before it'll deliver. And then you can get about the same yield for about 3 years in a row where you've planted it and now you're eliminating some of the planting costs and things year over year. And people use that as a transitional crop to regenerative or more organic practices because it takes that amount of time to get certified at times. So if you're interested in hey, I want to maybe turn over a couple of acres, Kernza wheat is a great way to do that. And if you are interested, I would 100%, you can reach out again to Mad Markets, or the Forever Green Initiative at the University of Minnesota has pioneered these crops. It's where they've been developed.
They've been doing wonderful, wonderful work.
Incredible
So
work.
the great thing about perennial crops is that the roots are so deep, and that's really good for climate. That's because the soil is losing its capacity to hold carbon. And so we are in a climate crisis.
We are indeed.
We have to figure out how to get the carbon back in the soil, and perennial grains is like a huge win-win, and it tastes good.
It does. And, a conventional wheat maybe has roots that get 12 to 24 inches, maybe 3 feet deep. Kernza wheat gets 12 feet deep. On the farm tour last year, they literally dug a pit next to the row of Kernza, and people were standing in this pit feet and feet, 10, 12 feet down, and that's where the roots end. And having that root structure to keep soil in place is so critical, and it really helps water capacity. So people, there are a lot of regen farmers who, when there are major rain events, their neighbors across the street, literally across the street, are flooded, and theirs are able to absorb that water rainfall event, and they're able to get on farm and harvest or plant or do what they need to do. So it's really a continuous system.
So regenerative is resilient. It's not defined, but it's resilient. It holds water. It's a great solution to climate crisis, and it doesn't have the externalities. It doesn't pollute the water. It doesn't use chemicals. Again, there's some variation in here.
Yeah,
so
and I
be
think
careful.
An interesting call out that Jason Robinson from AURI put on LinkedIn actually with some of his takeaways was organic has been very much about the practices on farm. What are you, using inputs, fertilizer, things like that. Whereas regenerative is very much about the outcomes. What have you done how are you measuring the healthy soil? How are you measuring water? How are those things actually playing out? And I think that's a really interesting distinction. And the hard part is that organic created enough of a what's in it for me for consumers to say, great, I feel better about buying produce that's not been covered in insecticides or things like that. And that's healthier for me and my family. And they are willing to pay that price premium. Whereas regenerative is much more of an altruistic viewpoint because it's about those outcomes. And it's about what that product has been doing for the land. And that's not a direct link to a consumer. And that's where I think regen has struggled to find enough of that what's in it for me for consumers to want to pay the price premium. And that's where you get a lot of advocacy for Regenic Organic.
So we're going to need to take a break. We're talking with Allison Hahn. She's the executive director of Naturally Minnesota. And so, this event was grounded on the outcomes, which things like soil health and nutritional value. But also one of the other key things is we got to make this accessible. This is not organic for a few and everyone else can eat the icky stuff. It's like we all have to be eating healthy and well-being for the soil to be healthy. So how do we transform the economic systems so that it's grounded on love and health and vitality? It doesn't sound like a very tough thing to do.
Ooh, transforming economic systems?
No, it's easy. It's easy. It's easy. If I can get the fish back in the tank, we can transform. No, just easy. We're taking a break. We're talking with Allison Hahn, executive director of Naturally Minnesota.
Nickels and dimes. Though it's known that what I own, it's not a large amount. There's a silver dollar in the sky, shining down the beach.
Welcome back to Food Freedom Radio. I'm Laura Headland, and we're talking with the Executive Director of Naturally Minnesota, Allison Hahn, about this great event that happened this week, Food Egg Ideas Week. And so when we left off, we were just kind of doing a review. The day started with a video from Amy Klobuchar. Then there was someone from Lundberg Farms, and then partnering organizations. And then we were talking about farmers' perspectives. And Matt Meyer with Thousand Hills, he actually said something that did make me feel hopeful and was a little different than what I've heard before, is that they have been surprised by how fast the land can regenerate itself.
Yeah, I think that's been a consistent shock and awe factor of, even within one season, a lot of improvement can be made. Obviously, it can take, they measure carbon of your soil and things like that year over year to track progress. But even within 2 to 5 years, a lot of farmers are seeing tremendous improvement. And the amount of carbon in soil is one, the water holding capacity is one, but also the chaos returning to the fields was a quote that was also super fun. And that's how they could tell when they would look at their fields versus literally, a neighboring farm across the road. There are birds flying over there's critters, there's insects. You can hear life happening in their fields, and you look across the way and it's not, it's quiet. I'm not going to say barren, but just it's not a thriving ecosystem. And so that whole ecosystem and returning and restoring nature to a little bit more of its natural state is such an important part of those practices.
Yeah, and I also love that person who was just talking about the sound of healthy soil. And the other thing that was in the room is there was a lot of deep science. So this deep science is essential because we all want to have the good stories, but the greenwashing doesn't get the fish back in the tank.
It does not.
So, but there were a lot of dotting the I's, really deep science going on in this area. It's emerging.
It is, and that's where because there aren't any federally regulated definitions of what does it mean yet. Everyone's got a little bit different checklist of what it takes to get there. But they are, knowing that, carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, those are things that are causing harm. For farmers to use practices that make their farm extremely reduced in carbon footprint or carbon neutral or carbon sinking. There's a number of farms where they are putting more carbon back into the soil than their entire operation is using. And that's, the carbon markets has been a continuously evolving part of the ag world. Again, because it's not regulated, it's hard for people to know what's real. Carbon credits are out and about there, but that is a potential. The hope around carbon credits is it's another monetization stream for a farmer. If you are sinking more carbon than you are expending, a farmer could sell those carbon credits to organizations who are looking to offset their own carbon impact. And I think that's the hard part is, farmers are collecting data. They're doing the hard work on farm, and they're not being incentivized or rewarded for it appropriately. And that's where the economic trades need to happen in terms of how do we better incentivize and support farmers.
Right. And people are stepping up and doing the work, but how do we honor them? And so there were a couple themes, though, that I really appreciated. One is the idea of a big tent. Because in these divisive times, and even the chaos of what they're doing there, all that, but the idea of just embracing people where they are, it's a big town, and focusing on outcomes. And so there are shared outcomes: clean water, vibrant soil, and making money
and healthy food
and healthy food,
higher nutrient density. I think that's the most emerging scientific area in regenerative agriculture. More and more studies are being done to show long-term effects and just the impacts of nutrient density, of tracking nutrients in certain vegetables or products of conventionally grown or raised versus regeneratively raised. And they have higher mineral and nutrient density, better fatty acid profile, depending on what it is. Yeah. And that, I think could potentially be an unlock for regenerative in terms of the value proposition for consumers.
I think so, too. And I know the science is emerging and people are working on it, and it's fun. So anything else with that farmer's perspective? We had David Stennis.
Yep. I think it's just understanding that farmers are assuming the biggest piece of risk. And if you are looking to source regeneratively grown products, ingredients, crops, figure out what's going to de-risk it for them. Do a multi-year contract. Agree to offtake whatever it is you're going to offtake. Do it at a price point that's going to actually be helpful. There are a lot of middlemen and brokers and things like that. If you're able to find the partners at the table who can take out some of those steps, so farmers are getting paid more for their crop and you're getting a better price because there's not as many cuts being taken out of it, do your homework. Find those partners who are doing that. But really, helping a farmer alleviate risk will be the biggest thing.
So, and then another segment was on scaling up. So talk a little bit about that scaling up part.
So, regeneratively grown crops, they have wider, this is where the food scientist in me comes out. They're going to have different, more wide ranging of water content or protein content or fat or carbohydrates or nutrients. And so if you are a product developer wanting to use a grain in a product, and you have a wider variation that you have to account for in that product, it can be very challenging to use it at a certain percentage. You may not be able to swap 1-to-1. And so finding processors who will process those crops into a finished ingredient, who will do it where they're maintaining the identity, and your Kernza wheat's not being blended into a bin with conventional wheat. It takes more to do independent runs. So the mills who are able to do that are fewer and farther between. I think 160 mills were closed last year. I mean, that's, and that's one thing Mad Markets is actually trying to do, is purchase mills. They've realized this is the bottleneck. So they've shifted a little bit of their value proposition, and it's how do we, they'll be raising money. If you want to, hardcore shout out for Alex Heilman. He's doing incredible work. Next year, I think they'll be raising tens of millions of dollars because they want to buy more and more facilities to operate them specifically to process regeneratively grown ingredients. And you need more than one mill. You need more than, because then you're talking about shipping costs. So if you're growing something, in a Western state, but the only mill is in the middle of the country and that ingredient needs to go to the Eastern Seaboard, the supply chain logistics of that really start adding up. And so that's where a lot of price premiums and things are coming from. And so understanding how the processing piece works out is really important. The other is that, these type of ingredients aren't just in a catalog with a normal ingredient company. You can't just call up your ingredient company and say, I actually want 2,000 pounds of regen beans for the next week, for the next 52 weeks. They'll say you should have called. So understanding timelines, understanding have any plans. If we can't get this crop, or if we only can get half of what we needed, how are we as a brand or a food company going to adjust to accommodate for that? So it does require more grace up and down the partner chain, and collaboration, and honestly transparent communication of understanding, help me understand what are the risks and limitations if I want this ingredient. What are the chances we may not, how much might we be able to get versus have to cover with a conventional. And that kind of bled into the next session a little bit around brands. We had a brand panel talking about what does it take to work with these farmers and these ingredients. So we're not going to jump ahead on that.
Well, because the one thing I put down on the scaling up is 75 farms per day are going out of business. And this is really difficult. So this is, yes, it seemed like getting the fish back in the tank was easy, but this is some really difficult work. 11% of farms account for 89% of revenues in this country.
Yeah, it's a lot of consecutive years.
Yeah.
And that's, the family farm is quickly disappearing because, I can't remember. I've heard different numbers about the average age of farmer in this day and age, but it's either in the late 50s or worse. And the problem is succession planning. A lot of, family farms don't have, the kids in the family or family members who want to take over the farm. So they have no recourse except to sell the farm. And then it gets consolidated amongst everything else that's happening, in their area. So a big conglomerate can come in and, they can snatch up 10, 20, hundreds, couple
or international conglomerates.
Yeah. So...
Now, one of the things about that land transition that I hadn't heard before that I heard at this conference is, but women are inheriting more land.
They are. Women live longer than men.
So, and that's why this work is so vital, is how do we help these small farmers here make enough money to have, I don't know what I want to call it, purpose-driven agriculture, I guess.
Yeah, and there is a growing contingency of emerging farmers. So... we have a really fabulous immigrant population in Minnesota who are wanting to not only grow culturally relevant crops for themselves. If you go to any of the farmers markets in Minneapolis, St. Paul, you'll find a really diverse array of crops that probably were never known in this state 20 years ago. But they're wanting to figure out how to build a good business and how do they start to add acres and do that and figure out what's economically viable aside from those. And so supporting emerging farmers and female farmers is really critical to the future.
Well, I'm 62, and it's surprising how the food system has changed. Now, when I was young, there really wasn't hardly any fast food. I mean, fast food was rare, and now it's so ubiquitous. And I mean, then also, like stir fries seemed quite exotic. And now it's like, well, of course, stir fries or tabbouleh and hummus, all these things are common. And then so to really bring up, what foods can we be eating and just to make that nutrition and soil and water honoring foods the backbone of our economic system, food system. So, and so one of the quotes in the thing is, imagine healthy food as the future of food. How cool is that? So there was a panel on innovation.
Yes. So because there are so many incredible organizations doing fun work in this space, we were like, well, this is our nod to our previous FAI rollout. And so we had 3 organizations share the work they're doing. The first up was the Forever Green Initiative at the U of M, and they're the ones responsible for pioneering the development of these new perennial crops as well as cover crops. And so we had Catherine Shute from there share a little bit about that. She works on their developing markets piece.
And just to say, there was actually an audible gasp because she showed a photo of here's, row crop, and here's when you planted some hazelnuts. And there's a, look, I mean, you could just see it looks pretty. And then there's, complications, but, like that could make money.
Yeah. On Monday, part of the conference, we had a subgroup of folks go out to Salvatierra Farms, which is part of Tree Range Farms, which is a regenerative chicken farm that was started by Rehi Hazlitt Marquand. And, they do, chickens, as he would say, chickens are a jungle creature, they're the old dinosaurs. And they want to forage amongst the bushes and the trees. And they specifically use hazelnuts because they have a higher ability to fixate nitrogen. And when you think about what comes out of a chicken at the other end, those trees are able to absorb that nitrogen into the soil, fix it, and grow beautiful hazelnuts. The chickens get what they need, and it provides cover. And so I think they use elderberries as well. And so there's entire, regenerative agriculture is much more about the whole holistic system as opposed to monocropping.
Right.
And
he's been on this show several times. He has a book, Green Man, In Search of Green Man, and I love his farms. But also trying to change the economic system so that the farmer can make money from those hazelnuts. And those hazelnuts, when the chickens are doing their thing, the hazelnuts are more nutritious and better, and we all live happily ever after.
It is, but to your point, though, I mean, it is what are the alternate revenue streams that a farmer can get out of this? Because it isn't viable to do just the one thing. They have to figure out what is the combination of products that they're developing that's going to make it economically viable for a farmer to be successful.
So we're going to need to take our last break. We're talking with Allison Hahn, the Executive Director of Naturally Minnesota, about Food Eggs Idea Week, and we will be right back.
Sitting in the sun, counting my money. And to top it all, when the shadows fall, I look to heaven and I see there's a silver dollar in the sky.
Oh, that silver dollar looking down at me, that moon energy. So you're listening to Food Freedom Radio. I'm Laura Headline, and joining us now is Allison Hahn. She's the Executive Director of Naturally Minnesota. And we were talking about this wonderful event. Some of the phrases we have, it's a big tent and people are coming together, and regenerative is really focused on outcomes. Yes, it's very complicated, but we also need accessibility. This is a food system for all, a food system grounded on clean water, healthy soil, vitality. And again, it's almost an economic system that's aligned with that song from Louis Armstrong. One of the innovations, so the innovation panel, was also Sue Marshall. And so I did a show with her September 14th. And someone had asked me, is anything good going on? And Tim, how about how about edible cups from upcycled grains? Yeah. I mean, there's so much that can happen. But again, I don't want to oversimplify because it is tough. So the segment we haven't talked yet about is the charting new course. So what happened during that part?
Yes. So, brands often, again, CPG brands, everything you buy on shelf at Target, they're the pull-through for ingredients a lot of times, and they're creating that market demand. And so, again, we briefly talked on, you can't just call up your normal ingredient supplier and ask for 2,000 pounds of regen beans. It just doesn't exist. And so brands really have to learn at whatever scale they're at, how do they find these ingredients? How do they find these sources? How do they need to think differently about formulating with them? And we had Charlotte Villegas from General Mills on that panel. And she talked about, for some of their brands, they depended on what brand it was, whether or not they called out, whether it's in the product or not. But also they realized that with supply being variable still, as it's an emerging area, they can't just convert an entire product and have the hero ingredient completely go 100% regen. And Kearns of Wheat was the example. And so what they end up doing is saying, okay, we're going to take as much as we can get and use it up to a certain percent across an array of products. And that way they de-risk it for themselves. They de-risk it for the product performance as they continue to formulate and make changes there. And they're able to offtake everything they can from the farmer. And so the farmer's getting, the money's getting paid, right? They're not having products sit in a silo or a bin somewhere, rotting away. Everything's off-taken, and they're able to incorporate that into those brands. And so a lot of it is around figuring out how best, what in your ingredient deck can you convert? How reliable is it? And how do you work with that value chain to figure out how to source?
Yeah, I've done other shows on this, but I appreciated just the upfront stuff about Kearns because then there was plans to do the cereal, and then there wasn't enough supply because something went wrong, and then there's a lot of supply, and then there's not some company to come and buy it. So, it's complicated. But one of the little stories she told that was a really nice win-win is that these farmers, regenerative farmers, one of the rocks is planting cover crops, healthy soil cover crops. But there's no place to sell the yellow peas. So in Annie's, they're using some yellow peas to help create a market for cover crops, which also makes the product have more protein.
Yeah, and so that's that's another interesting, rapidly evolving and developing market is cover cropping and the off-taking of those. And if you are Cargill, I know, is doing a lot of work in this space. General Mills is doing a lot of work in this space. My organization actually sits on Embold, which is a coalition containing a lot of those large companies. It lives at Greater MSP. And they have an entire, subset of goals around how do they support cover cropping and creating those markets for it. Because if, farmer's not going to do it if it's not going to make money for them and they have to pay for it.
And it's our job. It's all of our jobs.
Yeah.
It's not just the farmer's job to do that. So one of the quotes I heard is that there needs to be a dramatic shift, a paradigm shift from sustainability is kind of nice to have. Oh, that's kind of nice to must have. Now we're down to the last 2 minutes. So you want to talk a little bit about the ending keynote, Sean Sherman?
Yeah. So we finished the day with Sean Sherman talking about, the revolution of indigenous foods. And a lot of it was an education around the history of indigenous peoples across North America and how that played out in U.S. history, which is not told to many people. But there's just so much value and knowledge in local plants. And one of my favorite quotes, he's hilarious. And it was like, just because you don't know what a plant is doesn't mean it's a weed. And so figuring out how best to incorporate local foods. And I know he has a grand vision of having, he's creating this hub with natives and the Indigenous Food Lab at Mid-City Market, and wanting to set up similar hubs across the country, and knowing that we have so many different temperate zones across the U.S., they won't all have the same products. And it's really around how do you foster the growth of indigenous crops, indigenous, animals, whatever it may be, and use those. And it's not, it's for health, it's for medicine. One thing that I find fascinating about Minnesota specifically is we have this mega food ag industrial complex. We have a mega healthcare complex, and they are two tankers working in opposite directions.
Without a doubt. And unfortunately, down to a minute and a half. So I'm going to do a Cliff's note of just some of these things. So America spends $13,000 per person on health care compared to only $5,000 on food. The whole food as medicine and the nutrition and how to build that up. One farmer was talking about what Earl Butz said under the Reagan administration, get big or get out. And the other one is, or find a niche. And then we have these beautiful examples of companies that have found their niche. They're making money and enjoying their lives at the same time. It's amazing.
Novelty.
As storytelling is in our DNA. Where is the sweet spot with data, technology, and storytelling, and that authentic stuff? So, and we talked about not really defining regenerative agriculture, but it's about relational economics. So like Eco Ultra works with small farmers and pays up front. But this was the other statistic that still is scary. It's less than 1% of agricultural land in the U.S. is farmed organically. So Thank you, Allison Hahn, Executive Director of Naturally Minnesota.
Thank you for having me. A lot of our work as an organization supporting small entrepreneurs. So if you have a small natural product brand or anything up and down that value chain, reach out. We'd love to help connect and help build your business.
And you do that for free?
We do.
You do it for free?
We are a nonprofit. We don't have clients like a lot of the other economic support organizations, so we're a little unique, but we do a lot of programming. So workshops, education, experiential tours. Everyone loves an adult field trip. And FAI is our biggest event of the year that just happened. So it's a great way to convene and connect.
Convene and connect. You've been listening to Food Freedom Radio.